Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Saul Klein, Dean of the Gustafson School of Business at the University of Victoria and Chair of the Victoria Forum. Bonjour à tous. Je m'appelle Saul Klein et je suis président du Forum de Victoria. Merci de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. Au nom de l'Université de Victoria et du Sénat du Canada, je suis ravi de vous accueillir à ce Forum de Victoria virtuel sur le thème Combler le clivage à la suite d'une pandémie mondiale. On behalf of the University of Victoria and the Senate of Canada, I'm thrilled to welcome you to this virtual Victoria Forum, Bridging Divides in the Wake of a Global Pandemic. I'm coming to you from the University of Victoria and acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the university stands, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples, whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. I also ask you to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are on today as we engage in our discussions. It is with much gratitude that I introduce Dr. Skip Dick from the Songhees Nation to welcome us to the territory. He's an elder in residence at the First People's House at UVic and an honorand of the university.
Hello, my friends. My name is Lachichalak. I'm from the Court Nation, from the Lekwungen people, from the Lower Island. And on the island we have the West Coast Nuu-chah-nulth nations, and on the north of the island are the Kwakala people. But what I really want to do is make sure that anyone that's coming to our nation that is first-timers, that they feel that welcome. So I want to say Haishka for being here, and welcome to our nation, Haishka. Welcome to all those attending the Victoria Forum presented by the Gustafson School of Business and the Senate of Canada. I look forward to sharing the good news of the conference. Haishka.
Haishka, Dr. Dick, we're honored by your welcome. The first Victoria Forum was held in 2017 under the theme of diversity and inclusion. At the time, we were concerned about the rise of populism, protectionism, and xenophobia around the world and wanted to present an alternative narrative, drawing on Canada's experience as a nation that has flourished by being open to trade, open to investment, and open to migration. We wanted to highlight the reality that we live in a diverse world and that we succeed by being inclusive of different peoples, perspectives, and approaches. Since then, we've continued to be concerned about the way that our world is becoming ever more divided, and we remain committed to finding solutions to the world's most pressing problems. The Victoria Forum convenes change makers from diverse spheres to identify ideas for a better world. We bring together policymakers, academics, business leaders, and civil society more broadly to focus on solutions. While we may have different views on how to get there, we believe that we share common objectives to create a healthier, happier, and more peaceful world, one where individuals and societies can achieve their innate potential. When we began planning for this year's Victoria Forum over a year ago, we decided to focus on how to bridge the economic, social, and environmental divides we are witnessing, and thought to do so through three lenses: turf, trust, and truth. Without losing this orientation, however, COVID-19 changed everything. We could no longer meet in person, and the pandemic began to expose and exacerbate the fault lines that already existed in the world. We decided to postpone our face-to-face meeting until November of 2021 and assemble virtually now with a sharper focus and new urgency on how to bridge the divides that are widening in the wake of the pandemic. Leading up to today, we've hosted a series of 11 webinars designed to set the stage for this event and begin the conversation. Moving to a virtual world has had drawbacks, but also brings advantages. Around 500 people joined us in Victoria in 2017 for an extraordinarily engaged set of discussions, and we will miss some of that interaction. At the same time, however, over 1,000 people from over 50 countries are joining us this year, thanks to the online format. This increasing global reach is important, not only because it brings greater diversity of perspectives, but also because the pandemic has highlighted the need for global solutions. The pandemic has demonstrated that events in one place impact people in other places, whether they want to be affected or not. And contagion happens in health as well as in economic conditions. The same is obviously true of climate change. We simply cannot live in splendid isolation. COVID-19 is widening the economic disparities within and between countries. It is differentially impacting the poor, the aged, and the disadvantaged. It is causing social disruptions to how we work, how we live, and how we associate with one another. We come together at the Victoria Forum not to restate the obvious, but to come up with solutions. We come together with a sense of purpose that resonates across our various communities and constituencies. We come together with a recognition that we have a shared obligation, and together we can make a difference. This sense of purpose is shared by the hosts of the Victoria Forum, the University of Victoria and the Senate of Canada, and by the various individuals and organizations that will be presenting their thoughts and ideas over the next few days. It is also shared by our founding sponsors, TELUS and Vancity. We're grateful for their support, and I encourage you to visit their booths in the exhibition area. While it is easy to feel disheartened by current events, and we need look no further than the United States to see the consequences of a divided society, we can also see positive changes occurring around us. In my own area, as Dean of a business school, I see a change taking place in the nature of business, a change towards a broader stakeholder model of capitalism that is being driven by consumers expressing their demands for more responsible suppliers of goods and services, and a concern for how products come to market, not only that they're of good quality and price. This is a change that is also being driven by organizations realizing that in order to attract and retain talented employees, their behavior needs to be seen as congruent with the values of their staff. Regulators and our society at large are similarly expecting organizations to play a positive role, not only in mitigating any negative consequences of their activities, but also in being a force for good. As we shall hear in one of our panels today, management education is adapting, and business schools are being called upon to ensure that our graduates are equipped to manage this new set of expectations. My own school, for example, has just relaunched our MBA with a focus on sustainable innovation. Other sessions will look at efforts being made to enhance financial inclusion, looking at the potential of fintech, using technology to provide financial services, to deliver a broader set of benefits, as well as how combining public and private sector investments are key to building economic resilience and inclusive economies. Once again, we cannot help but look at the role of the United States in this fractured world. We will have roundtable discussions examining the consequences of last week's elections on both the Middle East and Asia. We will consider the impact of social media on elections, and also more broadly in its impact on our understanding of truth and the erosion of trust in our institutions. Throughout the forum, we will look for different perspectives and worldviews, and learning from Indigenous knowledge will play a key role in grounding our understanding in millennia of experience. We will focus on the uncertain future facing our youth, the scourge of systemic racism, and effects on both local and global communities, and also consider whether and how democracy can work to solve contemporary problems, including those driven by climate change. We're also pleased to host a session in French, examining the role of universities in bridging socioeconomic and environmental divides, organized in partnership with the Agence universitaire de la francophonie. Nous sommes également heureux d'accueillir une session en français sur le rôle des universités dans la réduction des fractures socio-économiques et environnementales, organisée en partenariat avec l'Agence universitaire de la francophonie, AUF. Our discussions are intended to be evidence-based and welcoming of different points of view. While we may disagree at times, we will do so without being disagreeable. I look forward to these discussions and thank you for your engagement with us. J'anticipe avec impatience les discussions et je vous remercie de votre engagement. I would now like to introduce the Honourable Janet Austin, Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, to welcome us to this event. Her Honour was sworn in as the 30th Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia in April 2018. Prior to this appointment, she spent 15 years as Chief Executive Officer of YWCA Metro Vancouver, one of the province's largest and most diversified nonprofits. Her commitment to helping improve the lives of others is demonstrated by her volunteering with many organizations. Her Honour has served on the boards of TransLink, the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, the Canadian Pediatric Society, the Council for Early Child Development, the Women's Health Research Institute, Mosaic, and the Dr. Peter AIDS Foundation. She has been a long-time volunteer with United Way of the Lower Mainland and has served on the BC Provincial Advisory Council on Social Entrepreneurship, the City of Vancouver Healthy City for All Leadership Council, and the Organizing Committee for the National Retreat for Women. Her Honour is Chancellor of the Order of British Columbia and was invested as a member of the Order in 2016. She holds an honorary doctorate of laws from Kwantlen Polytechnic University. Her Honour, the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia.
Thank you very much, Professor Klein. I too am speaking from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt, and so I will say, Ait Squaichel Stelacha Aikwanis Quananga Hela. Good day, dear friends. It's wonderful to be among you today, and I mean that most sincerely. I can't tell you how delighted I am to have the privilege of opening the 2020 Victoria Forum and thanking both the University of Victoria and the Senate of Canada for convening this discussion on a topic that has certainly been consuming me this past 10 months. And that is, of course, how do we bridge divides in the wake of a global pandemic? I particularly wish to thank Professor Klein for his leadership of the Victoria Forum over the past 3 years, and to acknowledge the very distinguished speakers who join us for this opening plenary, including, of course, my vice-regal colleague, the Honourable Elizabeth Dowdeswell, Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. Recent months have been fraught with the diverse and urgent challenges brought on by the global pandemic, and we have seen markedly different responses in jurisdictions around the world. In some cases, the challenges of pandemic management have been exacerbated by increasing polarization and hyperpartisanship, factors that breed cynicism and impair the ability of governments to create the social cohesion needed to inspire collective action for the collective good. But here in British Columbia, I have to say, and in many places around the world, these months have also brought a generous sharing of new knowledge, built trust, and inspired cross-partisan teamwork among traditional adversaries, and taught us patience, compassion, and humility. The pandemic has brought into sharp focus these alternate futures that lay before us, presenting us with some key questions. What are the factors that inspire solidarity and a commitment to collective action and shared prosperity? Or alternatively, can tip a society into division, increasing inequality and instability? How can we strengthen civility, respect, and goodwill across partisan divides? How do we deal with the online echo chambers that insulate us from views that differ from our own, and the tsunami of technological innovation that is changing everything? And how can we support young people to navigate an uncertain future and equip them to lead our country in responding to the big challenges that lay ahead? What is the future we want for our country and indeed the world? Here in Canada, I do believe that we are seeing a renewal of our commitment to the Canadian values of diversity and inclusion, tempered by a recognition that the equal society we aspire to is not a reality for many, and that we have work to do. We better understand our mutual interdependence and the importance of acting collectively to address our challenges of economy, climate, and society. There is new openness to big ideas and new ideas, ideas based not in old ideologies, but in the evidence and new knowledge, and grounded in a values-based commitment to shared prosperity. I believe we've been given a gift, and that is a chance to look at our world with fresh eyes and to reassess our priorities and create a better future of shared prosperity for all. The work that you are doing together can help to prepare us for that better future. And I want to thank you for showing us what it means to engage deeply and constructively in the kind of real conversations that can deepen public understanding and move us to those places of compromise in between the extremes of public opinion. I honor you for working to bridge the divides that lay before us and for helping us all to see the bigger picture, the longer term, the larger purpose. Your work gives me hope for a better world. It really does. Heichka, merci. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna, for those inspiring words, but also for the leadership you're providing through your focus on democracy and civic engagement and your commitment to enhancing civil discourse. This Victoria Forum is being co-hosted by the University of Victoria and the Senate of Canada. We at UVic are proud to build this partnership with a body that, in the words of Canada's first Prime Minister, was to be Canada's house of sober second thought. Through the support of Senators Yona Martin, Jim Munson, and Yuan Pawu, the Senate has embraced the idea of the Victoria Forum across all sides of the chamber. 8 senators have participated in our webinars to date, and several more will be participating over the next few days, reflecting a truly non-partisan commitment. Our partnership with the Senate would not have been possible without the support of the Speaker, and I would like to thank him for seeing the potential that we could achieve together. A distinguished educator and lawyer with deep roots in the community, the Honourable George J. Fury, QC, is a native of Newfoundland and Labrador and currently serves as the 45th Speaker of the Senate of Canada. He was appointed to the Senate on August 11th, 1999. Speaker Fury?
Good morning, everyone. J'ai l'immense plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue au Forum virtuel de Victoria. Il s'agit du premier forum organisé en collaboration avec l'Université de Victoria et le Sénat du Canada. The theme of this year's forum focuses on bridging societal divisions in Canada and around the world, which have been either illuminated or exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Although the circumstances under which we are convened are somewhat different than originally planned, the conference remains true to its promise of examining these divides through the perspectives of turf, truth, and trust. These perspectives are informed by our ideas, our backgrounds, our beliefs, and our experiences. They are expressions of the values that define us as people and as a society. Now, in the face of a global pandemic, it is more essential than ever that all of us in government, business, academia, and civic life draw upon our shared values to forge a path forward. In an increasingly atomized society that conspires to separate us from one another, they are the bonds that unite us. This has been a difficult period for every one of us, but hopefully together we can work to bridge the divides that are inherent in our new reality and build a successful future for the world. It is a goal worth striving for. It is a goal we will achieve. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Speaker Fury. And thanks also to all of the staff of the Senate who have helped us realize our common vision. In particular, I want to thank Stuart Barnable, Chief of Staff to the Speaker, for all of his help. Moving from the national to the local level, we have enjoyed tremendous support from Her Worship the Mayor of Victoria, Lisa Helps. Lisa Helps became the 52nd Mayor of Victoria when she was elected as such 6 years ago and was sworn into office for a second term in November of 2018. Prior to being elected as Mayor, she served as a Victoria City Councillor from 2011 to 2014. Mayor Helps believes that the best way to address complex challenges is to bring people from a diversity of backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences together and to truly listen to each other. This is an approach that aligns strongly with what the Victoria Forum aims to achieve. Mayor Helps has served on the advisory board of the Victoria Forum since its inception and will also be speaking in a roundtable session tomorrow on Can Democracy Work to Solve Humanity's Critical Problems. Let's hear from the Mayor now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Helps, and I am the Mayor of Victoria. I'd like to begin my remarks by acknowledging that here in Victoria, we're on the homelands of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. And more than just a territorial acknowledgement, when we're talking about bridging divides, it's important to recognize with respect the generosity that the Indigenous people of these lands have shown to those of us who are more recent arrivals here. Generosity, the work towards building mutual understanding in an era of reconciliation. So I want to begin with that heartfelt acknowledgement. I want to welcome all of you to the Victoria Forum and virtually to the City of Victoria. We were looking forward to hosting all of you here in the capital city of British Columbia from Canada and around the world this fall to discuss this very important topic of bridging divides. But as we all know, life is not as we once knew it, and we're in a new era. And these conversations about bridging divides in the light of and in the era of a global health pandemic are more important than ever. So my hope is that over the next 2 days, even though we're on screens, we're not virtual. We're here, we're real. We need to have real conversations and some difficult conversations when we're bridging these divides, when we're in the era of a global pandemic. Who's left out? Who's not included? Who's affected differently by the pandemic than others? These are some of the really, really difficult conversations that we need to dig into together over the next couple of days. My hope is that we'll approach these conversations with both open hearts and open minds, recognizing that divides in some ways are no more than how we think about really critically important issues. Divides happen sometimes, oftentimes, because we're not actually, truly, authentically, and earnestly listening to another person's point of view, understanding how have they come to hold the beliefs that they hold? Why are those beliefs or those points of view different from my own? So this is hard work, but it's really good work. It's an honor to be the mayor of the City of Victoria, an honor to have such a fine institution as the University of Victoria and the Gustafson School of Business hosting the Victoria Forum. I wish you all, and I wish us all, the most heartfelt time and deep dive into these important issues over the next couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Helps, for all of your support and encouragement. Our final words of welcome come from our new President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Victoria, Dr. Kevin Hall. President Hall joined us only last week. He's an innovative academic leader known for his strong commitment to community engagement and research excellence. President Hall's 35-year career is defined by his leadership in issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, access to education, and sustainability. He has held leadership roles at Queen's University, the University of Guelph, and most recently, the University of Newcastle in Australia. President Hall, we're delighted to have you welcome the Victoria Forum and have you join us as President of the University of Victoria.
Thanks very much, Saul, and a big warm welcome to everyone from around the globe. What a fantastic turnout today. We've got hundreds of participants from over 23 countries, 90 speakers. And before I start, Saul, by the way, I just wanted to congratulate you for the outstanding rankings of the Gustafson School of Business in the recent Corporate Knights rankings. This accolade is important for many reasons, but it's the one I want to highlight is really it's the one that attracted me to the University of Victoria. And that's really the commitment of the institution, its students, its staff, and its faculty to the Sustainable Development Goals. So on behalf of the University of Victoria, I'm delighted to welcome you to this virtual Victoria Forum, Bridging Divides in the Wake of a Global Pandemic. It's really a great honor for the university to be co-hosting this event in partnership with the Senate of Canada. And as Saul mentioned, I'm in week 2 as the new president and vice chancellor at the University of Victoria, and I'm really pleased to be engaging early on in this collaborative effort to explore the effects and implications of the pandemic. They're really far-reaching on our economies, on our society, and on the environment. As a university, we've had to pivot incredibly quickly to ensure that we maintain an excellent student experience and a continuity of our translational research. And this pandemic has been unlike anything we've experienced in our lifetimes, and I hope you're all staying safe and well. Normally we gather together in person for events like this, and we're so fortunate that technology will allow us to continue to engage with one another and to collaborate globally despite the ongoing pandemic. I thought I'd tell you just a little bit about the University of Victoria. We're one of the leading research-intensive universities in Canada, a great depth of expertise amongst our faculty, our students, and our staff. And we innovate to create actionable solutions to the urgent challenges the pandemic presents. We live our shared values of environmental responsibility and leadership, of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and we've got a really deep commitment to ensuring reconciliation is front and center of everything we do. And during these extraordinary times, I'm really reminded of the important part that universities can play through education and research, by driving regional, economic, and social change, and through events like this, public engagement. By thinking creatively about the opportunities, by broadening our understanding and mobilizing knowledge, we can all work together to find our way out of even the most confounding challenges. And the work that you're all doing at this Victoria Forum will have a significant impact, and your efforts will help our local and global communities to build back better, to build back greener, and to build back more inclusively. I'm delighted to see participants and changemakers from so many different countries come together for this forum, and I've no doubt it's going to be a fantastic success. I look forward to hosting you one day in person on our campus and in our beautiful city. So thank you all for joining us virtually today and for working together on such critically important issues. And I really hope you enjoy the rest of what is certainly going to be a thought-provoking and impactful forum. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. As I mentioned earlier, we have a terrific program. Please feel free to attend any sessions you wish, even if you did not indicate them when you registered. If you're not able to attend them all, please know that they're being recorded and will be available for you to view later. Please also bookmark November 2021, when we hope to reconvene face-to-face for the next Victoria Forum. Leading up to then, please stay tuned for continuing events and discussions throughout 2021. And now to the main event, our opening plenary, Bridging Divides in the Wake of a Global Pandemic. I'm pleased to invite Ambassador Sebastian Berlier to introduce the session. Ambassador Berlier is an experienced diplomat and executive at Global Affairs Canada. His over 20 years of international experience includes work on a wide range of global issues, international security, trade policy, and international trade litigation, with postings to Geneva, Paris, Tunis, Beirut, and now Dakar, where he serves as Canada's ambassador to Senegal. Sebastian Berlier is an adjunct professor with the University of Victoria, associate co-chair of the Victoria Forum, and one of the visionaries behind the establishment of the Victoria Forum. Sebastian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sol. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on the planet. Je m'appelle Sébastien Berlier. Ça me fait plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à cette plénière d'ouverture en tant que co-président associé du Forum de Victoria et en tant qu'ambassadeur du Canada au Sénégal. We all wish we were in Victoria today, but I must say that as co-chair and a Canadian diplomat, I am grateful for today's conversation, which will be truly global, with our great panel, but also participants over these coming 2 days from 53 countries. We have on a un panel extraordinaire aujourd'hui pour lancer les travaux, et on a trouvé la modératrice idéale pour la session. Nala Ayed, c'est une journaliste respectée, une reporter primée dont le travail est reconnu au Canada et à l'international. Et puis, elle aime les idées. En fait, les idées, Ideas, c'est le nom de son émission à CBC. Et nous sommes bien servis de l'avoir aujourd'hui comme modératrice. We do have an amazing panel today to kick off the 2020 Victoria Forum. And we could think of no better moderator than Nala Ayed, an acclaimed journalist and award-winning reporter. You will see, if you don't know already, that she loves ideas. In fact, Ideas is the name of her show on the CBC. Over to you, Nala. Merci.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that lovely introduction. Thank you all for the warm welcome, and a warm welcome to everybody who's joined this call for this opening plenary discussion. As you've seen in the program, the title is Bridging Divides in the Wake of a Global Pandemic. And let us be clear right from the start that, like the pandemic that sparked this conversation, this is a discussion that is going to be global in scope. We will touch on the environmental, economic, and social divides that are marking the experience of living through this pandemic in ways that are so stark that they can literally be seen both on local and on global maps. Once we've had a preliminary round of discussion, you, the audience, will have an opportunity to participate by submitting your questions through the Q&A function on the Zoom call here. You can send your question anytime, whenever the fancy strikes you, but please keep them brief so we can get to as many of them as possible. Let's also agree at the outset of this discussion that this is a mammoth question that we're tackling, and one that's challenging to cover in the very brief time that we have, and that it is part of an ongoing conversation, which you will continue once this particular session is over. So with all that in mind, you'll forgive me, in particular the panelists, for asking you to be as brief and succinct as possible. Still, even in such a short time, the idea is not only to point out the problems, but to try to find some practical solutions and perhaps even some recommendations on how the world moves forward from all of this, from what is arguably an inflection point in our collective history. With us to do that are three panelists who are well placed to consider these questions. I'll give you a very brief introduction to all three. Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, who is president of the African Development Bank Group. He's former Nigerian agriculture minister and often described as Africa's optimist-in-chief, which we will be testing today. Dr. Hakima Al-Haiti is the 14th president of Liberal International. She is member of the executive board of Mouvement Populaire Morocco. She's a former minister of environment in Morocco. She was also VP of COP21, which produced the Paris Agreement. And also the Honorable Elizabeth Dadswell. She's the 29th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, but throughout her career, she has served the public interest at all orders of government and in the private sector, including roles such as Under Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program. Welcome to all of you panelists. And we're going to begin, as mentioned, with a very short, as short as possible, opening statement from each of you, starting with Dr. Adesina. Please proceed.
Unmute myself. Thank you very much. I would like to thank Honorable Frey, the Speaker of the Senate of Canada, like President Hall. Congratulations on your appointment, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Victoria, the Mayor and Ambassador Berlier for inviting me to join this exciting Victoria Forum. We are meeting, dear friends, at a time of great global challenges with the global pandemic we have with COVID-19. Now, millions of lives have been lost. Economies have been devastated, jobs have disappeared, poverty and vulnerability have increased. The pandemic has worsened inequalities and left so many behind. There are just too many divides that we have. Let me just focus on a few of them. First, there's a huge divide in the global healthcare systems and the capacity to contain the pandemic. Africa had a very weak healthcare system before the pandemic started. The continent had an average of just 9 hospital beds per 10,000 people, 2 equipped labs for COVID-19 tests, and an average of 20 physicians per 10,000 people. Now think of that in terms of developed countries. They had 10 times in terms of number of physicians and nurses, and they spend 60 times per capita on health. The pandemic, without any doubt, has stretched Africa's healthcare systems beyond their limit. The second point is the fiscal divide has also worsened. Developed countries spend trillions of dollars on stimulus packages to contain the pandemic. Western Europe alone spent over $4 trillion. And that's about 30 times what it spent on the Marshall Plan. United States spends $6.5 trillion. Now think of African countries with very limited fiscal space. All they needed was just $145 billion for additional spending due to the effects of the pandemic. And so far, we're all working very hard. That has yet to be realized. Third is the digital divide has also grown. Countries with poor internet penetration, low electrification rates, and without access to internet or broadband, they couldn't stay open and transition into the business mode that we all have now, which we call the new normal environment. Fourth, the pandemic has worsened the divide between genders. Women face in Africa great risk of job and income losses from the pandemic, as majority are employed in the service sectors such as food and beverage, air travel, hospitality, tourism. These are the sectors actually most affected by the pandemic. And fifth, the pandemic is worsening educational divide. Children of poor families are just simply dropping out faster out of school. Inequalities in access to education are even more pervasive in the rural areas. And sixth is the pandemic has also laid very bare the divide on jobs in the labor market based on level of skills and the degree of formality or informality. In fact, we estimate at the bank that 25 to 30 million jobs in Africa will be lost at the end of this year. Now, most of this will be in the informal sector, which has been badly affected by the lockdowns. And finally, there are six extreme concentration in global manufacturing for healthcare equipment and supplies, including pharmaceuticals. Africa today imports all its medical equipment, 70 to 80% of all pharmaceuticals. So as the nations began to retreat into isolationism and export restrictions, it simply worsened Africa's market vulnerabilities. So just to close in terms of what are we doing about it? The bank launched a $10 billion COVID-19 crisis response facility to support African countries. We also launched a $3 billion COVID-19 social bond on the international capital market, the largest social bond ever in world history to support Africa. We will continue to provide more financial support for small and medium-sized businesses because they're the ones most affected by this pandemic in terms of lines of credit and, of course, trade finance. The bank is making really great progress with one of my really exciting programs that I call AFAWA. It's called Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa. I want to thank the government of Canada for really supporting us on this. The goal is we're going to leverage $5 billion of financing for women. And this year alone, so far we've done $180 million of financing leverage in 8 countries for women. The African Development Bank will continue to invest in expanding access to digital infrastructure. This is going to be key for the new normal environment that we are talking about and to provide opportunities. The bank will also invest heavily in building quality healthcare infrastructure and Africa's manufacturing capacity, especially in pharmaceuticals. Now, how we come out of this pandemic and the speed of our collective recovery process will depend on our shared global collective responsibility to join hands to mobilize scientific and financial resources, of course, backed with very strong political will. We must bridge the divide, and we must ensure health security and prosperity for all. If we can do that, that'll be a much better world, and I hope the Victoria Forum sends that signal that we can do that. Thank you very much. Now,
Thank you very much, Dr. Adesina, for that. Dr. El Haiti, please proceed.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be among you, and please allow me to congratulate the University of Victoria and the Senate of Canada on the organization of this high-level forum during such crucial moment for our humanity and for our planet. Dear friend, these days remind me of the period some time ago, actually 5 years ago, when together with the Moroccan delegation, we went to Paris to attend the climate summit COP21. We went there full of hope, with an inspiration to find an agreement, knowing that it will be challenging based on the previous failure. But few weeks later, we did sign the Paris Agreement, and I remember I have tears in my eyes, and I was not alone, because all of us, we had the feeling that we will not negotiate anymore for whom will survive and whom will die. And I understood that time that when we put forces together, we can serve, we can deliver, we can serve humanity and achieve what seems to be unachievable. 1 year later, after succeeding to still focus the attention of the world to the COP in Morocco, my country, which was challenging because we all know that when you sign an agreement is very hard task, but implementing it is even more difficult. I could never expect the political tsunami initiated by the new elected leader of the free world, who believed that time that this multilateral agreement should not be respected, threatening the climate, threatening the economy, threatening the free trade, and everything else that would come his way. Then you know the rest of the story. During 4 years, we watched with a combination of confusion and disbelief how the President Donald Trump has used language of division, has disrupted foreign policy norms, how he has shaken one international structure after the other in his mission to put America first. It could have been America first as America #1 leading the world. Instead, we saw more of America alone. Now that this episode of our common history is ending, flows the tone of Joe Biden and a tone of calm and unity, and in the language of division. We still have much to do. Our challenges are still there and more complex than ever. In a time where COVID-19 is eroding our health, our economy, our social organization, our human rights, and where the threats of climate change are increasing day after day. But let's ask ourselves why these populists rising to power, why still so many Americans voted for Trump in this election. And I believe that the answer to these questions is hidden in the unequal world we live in today. Let's agree that well before COVID-19, we lived in a world that was already hostile to many groups of societies, facing inequalities with many dimensions, with wealth distribution, inequalities in access to health care, education, access to natural research, access to knowledge and technology, access to equal opportunities. We all know that increase in income and GDP don't necessarily translate into increase in standard of living. The world has never been so rich. Collectively, the world is 3 times richer than what it was in 1990. But still, 75% of people in the developing world live in countries where income is more unequally distributed than in the 1990s. 800 million people in the world live in extreme poverty, and I was listening to Dr. Adesina and what he was saying about Africa. Inequalities have led to intolerance and hate, which has given birth to more discrimination, more division, to the demonization of migrants and refugees. It has led populists to power and Donald Trump to the White House. Wars were built, international treaties were questioned, populists undermined our multilateral order and created a climate of suspicion and fear in the world. Dear friends, well before COVID-19, we all knew that life on Earth will become impossible if we don't act now because of climate change. We all knew that 80% of our biodiversity is at the risk of extinction, threatening the equilibrium of the whole Earth ecosystem, which can lead to new diseases and pandemics. And COVID-19 will not be the latest pandemic if we don't act now. Moreover, and Dr. Adesina told it, the challenges of today have shifted also toward access to the digital world, which has created a lot of opportunities, but at the same time exacerbate inequalities and given rise to digital illiteracy. In this global digital world, the world is changing and we are not. The globalization we know now will not be the one of tomorrow. In the era of digitalization, artificial intelligence, and the global transformation called for by the Paris Agreement, we are placed in a historic moment where we have a chance to rethink and reinvent our shared future. Business as usual will not allow humanity to correct its mistakes. The world needs to turn this health crisis, which is originally an environmental crisis, into an opportunity to reduce inequalities and to empower education, to foster within the recovery plan the low carbon investments needed to reach the global transformation. This resonates with many SDGs. Dear friend, when slavery was abolished, many people in the establishment were concerned that the world would stop because it would lose its workforce. But what happened that time? Political will, new policies, and innovation took the lead, and the first machines that easiest human life were created. This is how we see life with the Liberal International. We believe that in every crisis there is always an opportunity to recover stronger and wiser than we were before. We believe that the world is borderless and humanity is a community with a shared future. We believe that even the most powerful nation in the world cannot reverse the digital globalization, climate change, or stop the waves of migrants. And we still believe that globalization, which has lifted millions of people out of poverty, if rethought smartly and fairly, will continue lifting out people of poverty. Dear friends, I will conclude by asking you to join me in proving that the only way out of this crisis is by cooperating even more. Join me in showing the world that multilateralism is the only answer to ensure peace and security in the world. Join me in creating a world where education, civic education, and now digital education is the priority, and where innovation towards radical solution is the way to accelerate our transition to allow us to build a sustainable world. Join me in rebuilding the liberal commitments which will not only hold populists off across the world but defeat it. This could only happen only if we do it together, and this could only happen when high school, universities are enlightening the world like you are doing within Victoria University. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Haiti. Next, we have Your Honor, Ms. Dowdeswell. Apologies.
Thank you very much, Nala, and hello, everyone. My thanks as well, and warm congratulations to the Victoria Forum. My fellow panelists have been quite clear about identifying the divides, and I do concur. But my opening comments today are very much informed by an initiative to connect with personal leaders throughout the province of Ontario, about 200 of them altogether. Citizens are seeking leadership. They recognize it and they reward it when they see it. It won't surprise you that I heard stories that were poignant because people are grieving, they are vulnerable. But equally, I was inspired by stories of collaboration, courage, creativity and adaptation, solidarity, empathy, acts of kindness. In other words, compelling stories of anxiety and hope in equal measure. I want to make 4 observations that focus directly related to the theme of bridging divides. The first one has to do with collaboration among orders of government. Almost without exception, in my hundreds of interactions, people commented positively on the fact that federal, provincial, and municipal governments were coming together in common cause. Partisanship, at least in the first phase, was almost invisible. And people mused, wouldn't it be wonderful if that actually became the norm? I was also struck by the very visible role played by municipal governments. These are the order of government that's often forgotten, taken for granted, yet it's closest to people and absolutely crucial in building cohesive communities during a time of crisis. Daily, they are the ones who manage the mundane. And not surprisingly, they're also looking ahead, quite simply seizing the opportunity to physically and socially build community. The second observation has to do with the evidence that we have about trust and confidence in science that's actually resulting in evidence-based decision-making. Of course, we also saw that not everyone understands how science works, that it actually evolves as the advice actually evolves as the science evolves. And so we saw debates and a certain amount of confusion around the wearing of masks, the closing of borders, and so forth. But overall, there has been general acceptance of the states of emergency and singular focus of our scientific researchers racing to develop a vaccine and treatment. The concurrent lesson learned is the absolute necessity of clear and consistent communication. It really has been said, and I agree with it totally, that we make progress only at the speed of trust. And that trust is in our scientists, but that trust is also has to be built with our decision makers. The third observation is that the pandemic has illustrated vividly the fact of our interconnectedness. Few of us in Canada can ever recall any circumstance in their lifetimes when everyone, everywhere, has been affected by an event. The closing of borders for us is unthinkable, and the repatriation of our citizens from around the world was most challenging. Who knew about the fragility of our supply chains and how very dependent we are on other nations? You know, for years, those in the environmental community have been trying to teach us about ecosystems and about systemic and holistic thinking. The pandemic illustrates that we still operate in silos. There are so many disconnects. I mentioned two. Most tragically, the disconnect between our healthcare system and the long-term care of our elderly. We will not be able to forget that. And secondly, most significantly, governments, as they plan for a restart of our economy, are realizing that effective recovery may well be dependent about things we used to call social issues, women's issues, and that is an effective system of childcare and education. We've even had a new word added to our vocabulary, she-cession. The bottom line is that systemic thinking is demanded as never before, as everything really is connected to everything else. Interestingly, we actually have a policy framework called sustainability that connects the dots between economic prosperity, environmental stewardship, and social and cultural cohesion. And we have sustainable development goals, the world's to-do list. It's not a bad place to start in a pandemic. But what does sustainability look like post-pandemic? In a sluggish economy, clearly we're going to have to set some priorities and not have simply hundreds of targets. And I would caution that we really do need to start from where people are right now, not from our predetermined solutions prior to COVID. The fourth observation, and perhaps the most important one, is around the fundamental question of inequality that has been fully exposed. Who is essential? Who and what is valued? Those of us who've been fortunate enough to self-isolate do so on the backs of others, those who take risks for us, the hospital cleaners, the delivery people, the grocery store workers, those who are doing precarious work. We live in a very prosperous country, yet if we clearly look carefully, we see lives of quiet desperation. This pandemic is being experienced very differently by the rich and the poor. We're all being forced to examine systemic racism of Indigenous, Black, and people of color. And in fact, we have much to learn from our journey of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. We've also seen the need for mental health supports, the quality of life of migrant agricultural workers, and those of differing abilities and disabilities. Someone has very accurately said, there is no vaccine for poverty, hunger, homelessness, or inequality. So finally, as we see an unmistakable hunger for normalcy, the primary source of stress that I see is the lack of clarity about the end point and what it's going to look like. We know that we can't stay in survival mode for so long. We can only stay in it for so long. And yet we know intuitively that recovery is not going to be normal. We will be coexisting with this virus for some time. My sincere hope is that we will not simply drift into a new normal. We have the opportunity, a unique moment in time, to design and build a better normal. A reset, if you like, not going back to the status quo. I wonder if we can maintain the momentum of the lessons that we've learned these last 9 or 10 months and avoid collective amnesia. Will it be a green recovery? Will we create the conditions for sustainability and resilience? And will we really be bold and ambitious enough? You know, I've, like you, participated in numerous Zoom calls where thoughtful people are asking, can we actually find a safe space for respectful conversations? Because unfortunately, all too often, these conversations that we're having are really like-minded people talking to themselves. Those on the street are not in the room, and all perspectives are needed, for it's together that we're going to save lives and livelihoods.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. I appreciate all the comments, and we'll just have as quick a discussion as we can before turning to audience questions. And what I'd like to point out is that I think what I heard from all of you, and certainly from some of the comments earlier introducing this panel, is that we can all agree that the fault lines that we're seeing pre-existed the pandemic and are now simply being revealed to those who hadn't noticed them before. Now, all of you, all three of you, have at one time or another served on international, multilateral, or governmental institutions, which were, as you all have pointed out in some way or another, under pressure before the pandemic. In a world that's been struggling at a minimum to safeguard multilateralism on the global stage, I'm wondering if you see if there is a common thread to what ails all these various existing institutions that also played a role in aggravating the social, economic, and environmental divides. And Your Honor, I'd like to begin with you, Ms. Dowdswell.
Give me the tough question. Indeed, you know, there's nothing like international institutions to try and learn how to deal with a board of 190 plus different nations. The way in which we develop a contract among ourselves has to be based on the capacity to actually create conditions of listening, and to do so with a great deal of humility. It's not an easy task at all. The conditions from country to country vary greatly. If we can, in fact, focus on, most importantly, what brings us together in common cause. If we can agree on what we want to achieve, then in fact, country by country, we can decide on the appropriate approaches. But I think the capacity to understand that we are all in this together, and that in fact we do need to ensure that we are paying respect and to each of us around the world. Where there's nothing like a pandemic virus to actually illustrate that if we don't solve the problem for each and every one of us, we won't solve it for ourselves. It's as simple as that.
But to understand what underlies the inability of these institutions to address this disruption in our societies, Dr. Adesina, perhaps I can tailor it to your specific situation and some of the comments that you mentioned. You know, what does it say about our institutions when even getting masks on the international stage has become sort of a selfish isolationist act on behalf of nations, when, you know, the words vaccine nationalism have now become a household expression. What is that? What do we deduce from that about the institutions that exist right now to safeguard all those good things that all of you have mentioned?
Well, I want to start out by saying what the Lieutenant Governor said about the importance of trust. We must have trust in the institution's capacity to deliver, the institution's capacity to listen, the institution's capacity to be able to respond, and to have a sense of joint accountability. At the end of the day, I remember I had a conversation with my late mentor, Kofi Annan, the late United Nations Secretary General, and he told me, he said, look, Akin, the only important promise is the promise that's kept. And so we can get together and say, okay, we commit ourselves to SDGs, we commit ourselves to this, and people listen to us. Or we go for the climate meetings and people listen to us. And then we don't keep those promises. I'll take the case that the minister from Morocco was talking about climate. I was there with her in Paris. The agreement that was reached, but that would be $100 billion provided annually to support countries, mainly, poor countries, low-income countries, small island states, and so on, to be able to cope with the climate agenda. Well, today, it really hasn't been met. And so that creates a lot of fractures, if you wish, in terms of how institutions look at it. But I do think that, I was very fortunate today to have been part of the global financing common that we're talking about and saying, how do we bring all that together? Now, one thing that I think it's going to be very, very critical as well is to realize that there are certain things about, take the case of the mask that you talked about. I was surprised in Africa we didn't have masks. I mean, there's no brain surgery in making masks, but it's because we got used to particular inequalities. Take pharmaceuticals, for example. Africa has only 375 pharmaceutical companies. That's it. And most of those are importing simply the drugs, but they're not making the active pharmaceutical ingredients. India has 11,000 pharmaceutical companies for a population of 1.4 billion people. Africa, 375 for a population of 1.3 billion people. And you take a look at China with about 7,500 companies. So we do need to look at existing industrial structure, manufacturing structures that concentrate things outside of developing countries and make sure that we are able to change that. Because if we're going to have a level playing field, there must be a level playing field in terms of access, but not just accessing what somebody else produces, but in terms of being able to produce it there yourself. And that's why, what I was saying in terms of building Africa's industrial manufacturing capacity, it's important. It's so crucial.
Dr. Al-Haiti, can you hear me right now? We were having some technical issues there. Can you hear me now? Okay, we'll continue until we sort out that issue.
Nehla, can you talk a little bit louder? Because
of course I can. Yes, of course.
Yes, please.
Yes, absolutely. Does this sound a bit better?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Very good. Okay, I'm glad we have you back. I want to. It's hard to do this in such a short time, but I do want to address this particular question in the context of the fight against climate change. And so, what does the apparent weakening of international institutions mean for the global fight against climate change at a time when clearly the pandemic has eclipsed this fight against climate change?
Yeah, I hope that the pandemic will not eclipse the fight against climate change. But I think the Glasgow is postponed, yes, indeed. But I hope that we will not stop, because nobody is talking about the fact that the origin of the pandemic is an environmental origin, and it's turned to be a health crisis which has consequences on our life, economy, etc. And I think that we should say it loud, that this crisis is an environmental crisis which turned to a health crisis. And now, more than ever, we should stick to the negotiation, and we should stick to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And I have hope that with now the election of Joe Biden and the coming back of the United States to the arena of negotiation, we will see the commitment of the developed country respected. As Dr. Asidina was saying, they committed by 2020 to support developing country by bringing $100 billion a year, but this is something which was postponed. But you know, to be within a multilateral arena is always very difficult, because you have to find consensus between 197 countries. And you can imagine that this is not easy. But all the international community was convinced, and we had the leadership of United States, of France, of many Africans who were calling for more climate justice, and we did succeed, you know, and the pandemic came and postponed everything. And I think that more than ever we should send the message that it's more urgent than before the pandemic, because now we see that we have I will say a small repos, small rest of the pollution. But I'm very afraid, and I fear that when the economy will begin again, and the economy will be recovered, we continue to do the same business as usual. And we need more than ever to commit and to respect the commitment of the Paris Agreement.
As you say, business as usual is not, I think everyone will agree, is not an option, that the status quo is not an option. And if we agree that is in fact the case, that it's not sustainable, and that institutions, some of which have been around since the Second World War, require a retool, if not a reimagination entirely, what can be done to reimagine what you might call kind of a whole of society approach? Back to you, Dr. Adesina. For example, you're the head of a big development bank in Africa. What role do you see, for example, for the private sector getting more involved in bridging these divides at a time which we must say that, you know, the markets are rallying when other people, as you mentioned, are struggling to find just basic work?
Yeah. I just want to follow one thing from the minister, and I'll ask you a question on the climate change. Just like for us as a bank, because Africa suffers disproportionately. And so we have prioritized financing for climate. And in fact, we've committed ourselves to double our climate finance to $25 billion by 2025. And in fact, when I was elected in 2015, we had only about 9% of our total portfolio that was in climate finance. By next year, will be 40% of our total portfolio will be in climate finance. And I have said, we're not doing coal. Coal is gone. The future is in renewable energy. And we've also committed ourselves to make sure that we have 52% right now of our financing is in adaptation, because the challenge in Africa, it's not really so much mitigation, but in adaptation. So that's very important. But down to your point in terms of private sector, you know, we are in a situation in Africa today where we have a lot of debt situations, debt overhangs. But remember, a lot of the debt that we talk about in Africa is actually infrastructure-related debt. And governments are taking debt because they find out that concessional finance is going down, and therefore they go to international capital markets and they raise money, which is understandable. However, why should governments be doing only infrastructure? That infrastructure should be done by government and private sector. It's a service. And so if you're doing infrastructure, you must be able to pay for it. So the key is to go forward and make sure that private sector becomes a driver of growth, and that the regulatory environment, the policy environment, and the business investment regulatory environment supports the private sector. Now, I'll tell you one thing that we're doing at African Development Bank. I'm fully big on this. We did something 2 years ago. We set up in Africa called the Africa Investment Forum to bring capital to Africa. You know, in less than 72 hours, Nala, in 2018, we mobilized $38.7 billion of private investment interest in Africa. Last year, we did it $40.1 billion. So what I'm saying is that we need to attract foreign direct investment. However, the last point I want to make is that Africa may be said to be poor, but actually Africa is not poor. We need to mobilize the domestic resources that we have, oil and gas, in minerals, in agriculture, in biodiversity, and all of that. And the institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, and all the mutual funds that we have, in total about $1.8 trillion. So the key is how to mobilize that. We have to de-risk to make sure the private sector can do that. We've got to prepare projects that are bankable to make sure the private sector.
I'd like to get Dr. Al-Haiti on this quickly, if I can, because we're running out of time very quickly, and we still have several more questions. So, Dr. Al-Haiti, a note and then a question next to Ms. Dowdeswell, Your Honor. Thank you.
I want just to say that Africa is not poor. Africa is a country which is rich, is a continent which is rich, where poor people are living. Africa is the reservoir of many resources, oil, diamonds, mines, etc. But what we need, and Dr. Adesina was talking about adaptation and mitigation, the 75% of the infrastructure, it's not existing in Africa. And the private sector can play a major role together with the government in Africa to build Africa. But what we need now, we need to drive the private sector to Africa. We need to make Africa attractive to people, to investors, to foreign companies. And when you ask, I am now in the private sector, and people are afraid to invest in some countries in Africa because they are thinking that they are not good payer, or they are thinking that they are not safe, etc. So we need, as Africans, to make Africa, which is a rich continent, attractive, to bring private sector to invest in Africa and to build Africa. But I think that within Africa we have an amazing reservoir of know-how, of resources. We have the African Bank, and you, Dr. Adesina, who is doing an amazing job, and I think that we can win this challenge, but the only thing is that the international community should stick together and respect the commitments.
I wonder if we could address just that issue, because there are going to be yet more geopolitical changes, obviously, throughout, it has been throughout this pandemic and will be further afterwards. I'm wondering, all of you, actually, I'll ask you this question, is, if we're moving further towards a multipolar model, how do you see that helping or hindering attempts to bridge these divides we're talking about? Ms. Dowdeswell, can we go to you first on that?
Can I just suggest that in response to the dialogue that we just had about Africa, that one of the things that I always come back to is the Charter of the UN that talks about we the people. It doesn't talk only about national governments. And I have been so impressed by the coming together of cities around this world who have stopped the talking and started the action. When you hear the relationship between cities in the developing and developed world and the actions that are already taking place with respect to technology, with respect to infrastructure, the digital divide, with respect to dealing in a most positive way with responses to climate action, I think one of the most opportune things is to actually reinforce the message that it's up to all of us, including all orders of government and people themselves. But it's with this is a moment of opportunity, because we surely understand that unless we come together around a solution to the pandemic, it's going to influence each and every one of us. We can't isolate ourselves, turn inward. We have to do it in collaboration with the rest of the world. And if we can do that well and take the lessons we've learned from the pandemic, why on earth can we not do something for a more existential crisis, and that's climate change?
One last question from me on sort of to close off this section before going on to questions from the audience. And Dr. Al-Haiti, I'll go to you for this, is if it is a whole of society approach, if everyone has to be involved, as Ms. Dowdeswell mentions, what is the role of the vulnerable in the actual rebuilding, if we are rebuilding better? How do you make sure that being on the wrong side of the divide doesn't automatically disqualify you from being part of the conversation on how to build back better?
I think that, I think that we are very dependent on in our interdependence. And I think that if the indicator to judge or to know if we have succeeded in our intervention by acting to tackle climate change is to look at the most vulnerable. I always remember one minister who was saying during the negotiation of COP22 and 21, save Tuvalu, you will save the world. Tuvalu is a very small island which is very vulnerable. If we succeed in saving the most vulnerable, we will save the world. If we succeed in tackling the climate change in Africa, in supporting Africans, for example, to adapt themselves to climate change, if we install climate justice, and this is what is about, what was about during 21 years in the negotiation within the Paris Agreement. If we install this justice, and we can then stop the consequences of the impact of climate change. Migration, we have climate migrants, we have climate refugees, and the IPCC report is talking about 250 million migrants by 2050. Africa will hold the most important population in the world by 2050. Imagine the consequences if we don't support the most vulnerable. So I think that our indicator, when I say the international community indicator, is to help and to support the most vulnerable, and this was already done. We are not negotiating anymore. The Paris Agreement is clear, and what we need now, we need to respect it and to implement it.
May I ask all three of you, just in closing, if you could make one concrete foundational recommendation to governments around the world, or to an international organization, or to civil society, or the private sector, to address one of the divides that we've raised, what would that be? If I can begin with you, Dr. Adesina.
Well, I think, for me, it's be accountable. At the end of the day, we can talk all we want. It's about accountability. Listen to your citizens, be responsive to them, and have political accountability. Poverty is not a normal thing. The fact that people don't have energy is not a normal thing. The fact that a small kid can't go to school and learn because they are hungry and because they are stunted, it's not a normal thing. The fact that you can have access to health is not a normal thing. These are the things that have become so abnormal that we've just normalized them. They shouldn't be normal. And therefore, we do need to have accountability on poverty, accountability to citizens. This is that's the role of government. If you're not accountable, that's a bad government. So just be accountable.
Ms. Dowdeswell.
I totally agree. We think of the United Nations as being the institution that was created to ensure that we all live in peace and harmony. But we have to understand that peace is so much more than the absence of war and conflict. Peace means that we are living without poverty, without homelessness, that we have a right to education, a right to good health, and that we are all global citizens. And that may not be admirable thing to say these days. It may be seen as something that's 50 years old, but it's never been more important than it is now. And I think we have to ensure that we don't let the psychology of fear and the psychology of turning inward at these times take over the heart of humanity.
Thank you. And Dr. Al-Haiti, before we go to audience questions?
I completely agree with my predecessor, but I will add, we need more solidarity. We need more international cooperation. We need all to believe that we are sharing our present and our future. We need to understand that the most vulnerable nations between us will impact us, even if we are the most important and the most powerful nation in the world. And I will come back to what Her Excellency was saying. The United Nations is the institution which was created to ensure peace and security, but I will say to ensure dignity of human being. So we need to ensure this dignity, and we will not have dignity if we forget about the others. And still we have hunger in the world, still we have poverty in the world, still we have 1,400,000 hours spent by girls to go to look for water. We are not living in dignity, and we can't afford that in our world, in our century, still people are living in this condition. So I will call for more international solidarity, more multilateralism, more international cooperation, and more respect of the commitments.
Thank you. And to bring up one of the first questions from the audience, which actually is related on exactly this very point. It mentions the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that were agreed in 2015. It says food poverty and hunger has gone up since, but there is enough food in the world to feed all, according to our UN report. This question is basically, how do we activate our humanity, our empathy, our pluralism to practically make the rhetoric a reality? So this person is asking for your thoughts on how do you actually, even before the pandemic even happened, we were having trouble reaching the SDGs. How do you make it happen at this stage? It's not an easy question. Maybe Ms. Dowswell, we can begin with you.
Well, I'll just make one quick suggestion, and that is that we do succeed when we find win-win solutions. So for example, here in Canada, in response to the question about food security, we know that one of the things that we can contribute is to the food security of the rest of the world. And we, by looking at solutions within Canada to support agricultural productivity here, we create jobs, we create an economic livelihood for many more people in our own country, and we make food available to the rest of the world. One example alone, the work that our scientists are doing in collaboration, and they are working in collaboration around treatments and vaccines, just a wonderful example of how the world comes together in support of everyone. And that supports our economy at home, but it certainly supports the health and economy around the world as well.
Dr. Adesina, the SDGs.
Yeah, well, when we talk about some of the challenges with climate change that we were dealing with, even with the COVID, then we ran into massive low-cost problems all across East Africa that has put about another, maybe 20 million people into hunger. And I'm particularly concerned about the implication of this for children because we have a high rate of stunting. And, we can build infrastructure, we can build roads, ports and rail and all of that, that's fine. But the most important thing for a human being is the brain. And so that's what I call gray matter infrastructure. Once that is damaged, it's damaged for life. And therefore, we must prioritize investment in safe, nutritious food, especially for children and pregnant mothers, because that is very, very important, if we're going to be investing in the future. The second thing I want to say is that scale up what is working. For example, for us at the African Development Bank, we're investing close to almost $25 billion over 10 years, we said, in agriculture to raise productivity, as Her Excellency was saying, in rural areas. 75% of the people are living in rural areas. So if you're really going to lead people with sustainable development goals out of poverty, we must change the rural economy from zones of economic misery to zones of economic prosperity. And that requires that we transform agriculture, which is their main source of living, into a wealth-creating sector. I've always said agriculture is not a way of life, it's a business. And so building the agricultural value chains, processing cocoa, processing coffee, transforming cotton into textile and garments and all of that, and making sure that Africa is competitive in global value chains. It's going to make sure that the revenue streams coming to those areas will go up and people can send their kids to school and all of that. The other thing I want to say is just make agriculture really cool. Look, agriculture is a mega sector. Getting the young people into agriculture as a business. Agriculture is very cool. I have always said that the greatest wealth you can have actually is agriculture. And the final thing I want to say is that we need global cooperation in developing the right technologies to adapt to climate impact on agriculture, which is going to have a massive impact on poor people. One of the examples I just want to share very quickly is what we did in a program at the bank called Technologies for Transforming African Agriculture. It's in Sudan. We actually helped to bring in new technologies for wheat, which is essentially a temperate crop, but which is actually a heat-tolerant variety that we introduced. And that provided them 25,000 metric tons of certified seed. Just to break what that means, an A380 aircraft, the total weight of it is 98.2 metric tons. So when you have 25,000 metric tons of certified seed, that's almost like 280 A380 aircrafts that are lined, 380 aircraft lined on a landing strip. Right. We've been able to help Sudan today to move its self-sufficiency in wheat to close to about 60% by that. So the technologies exist. What we need is work together, scale what really exists. But I'll close with one thing that I want to say on all of this, is that give me a promise and I'll have hope. But in fact, show me action, then I will believe. So I think we should focus a lot on action. There's only so much you can give me hope. If that hope is not real, it's immaterial.
The question that always comes up when people talk about hope and action is who drives the action. And so going right back to the beginning to the questions about institutions and the existing institutions and whether they need to be reimagined. Ms. Dowdswell, can I ask you, at what level do we decide who drives the action and the change? And as a second quick question, what is the average normal person? What is their role in all of this? So to you first, Ms. Dowdswell.
I think action takes place at all levels. And I think we need to be almost we need to exercise serendipity. When an opportunity arises in your local community, you take action. You tell the story, you tell others about it. You share that information and you participate in your province, in your country, and ultimately participate internationally. There is a real role for subnational governments, for civil society in all levels of international organizations, and they need to be heard and they need to take action. But so much of it starts with those individual connections with people. Canada is a country of immigrants. How much is actually being accomplished by the very work of our own citizens who go back to where they came from and to work with people there? I am full of optimism for people who are prepared to seize these moments and push the boundaries. It really is about hope, but there is enough action underway, and it requires us to also think about what motivates human behavior. And what we don't understand a lot about that, but I think the most important thing is to understand that most decisions are driven by emotion, not by reason. And I think we need to find ways to make sure we tell those stories that actually motivate people to take action.
Dr. Al-Haiti?
Yeah, I completely agree, because I always say that if you want to reach the mind of people, you should first touch their heart, and this is very important. But I will say that if we want it to happen, we need maybe three things. First, we need policies. And for that, we need to empower the elected people and officials in the countries where they have low capacities. We need to build capacities to allow them to make the right policies. And we need them to have access to finance, you know. We are speaking about NDCs, the National Determined Contribution in the Paris Agreement. And what we see now, we see that the ambitions are not enough high and are not bringing us or allowing us to reach the objective. But what we need that the action is taken locally, and to allow the localities and the sub-government, the local authorities to act. They need to be empowered, and they need finance. Third, I think that I will come back to what Dr. Adesina was saying. We need to invest on education. This is very important everywhere in our continent and in the world. We need to invest in education, and now not only education but also civic education, because we need people to understand what is the constitution, what are the laws, what are the policies, etc. Those civic education is very important too. And now we add the digital education. So investing on elected people, investing on education, investing on food security. How? You know that now in Africa, 500 million hectares are degraded because of the impact of climate change and because of the shortage of water. And this is what is the origin of hunger in some countries. So we need to invest on agriculture, and I agree completely with Dr. Adesina when he said agriculture is a business, and this is how we should empower the agricultural world. So that was my words, I think, for the end.
Okay, and that's and last word to Dr. Adesina, and then we'll hand it off. Go ahead.
Just in terms of the amount of money that institutions like us and others control, it's a lot of money in terms of public trust. But I do think that we need to do a better job of publishing what we fund, because we don't fund things for ourselves, we fund it for citizens. And so, for example, the African Development Bank, we were rated the 4th most transparent institution last year by Public What You Fund, because people ought to know what are you funding. That's a point that the High Excellency made, but I want to reinforce a point that she made in terms of local, subnationals, she mentioned in terms of local government, the subsidiarity of responsibility. Many of those, decisions.
We have less than 1 minute.
Yeah, okay. Decisions are made at the local level, but those local governments don't have resources. And so we've got to change the architecture of global finance to make sure that we can make financing available at the local government levels. So by doing, for example, municipal bonds and all those kind of things, and also helping many of these governments to become rated so they can actually raise money off the capital markets to support their citizens is very important. And the last thing is that, whatever you're doing, have a citizens forum. Let people see, let people have a voice, the youth, the women, the disabled, let everybody know. We must run a transparent way of doing things at government level, but also at our institutional level. It's so critical. When we say we shouldn't be working for people, we should be working with them.
Thank you very much for that. And many apologies to the rest of you whose questions we didn't get to. Dr. Adesina, Dr. Al-Haiti, and Your Honor, Ms. Nov12, Thank you so much for your insights, and thank you to the audience for your attention and for your interventions. And it was especially instructive, I think, to hear your thoughts on how to bridge social divides, because without equality, I think we can all agree, without serious thought to that area, almost every other endeavor will fail. Now I'd like to introduce the person who will make closing remarks for this panel. Lord John Allardyce has been involved in almost every aspect of the Irish peace process over the past 30 years. As leader of the Alliance Party of Northern Ireland from October '87, he played a significant role in all the talks between the political parties and the British and Irish governments on the resolution of the historic conflict in Ireland through to the negotiation of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. He was also the first Speaker of the new Northern Ireland Assembly and held a series of other appointments in the pursuit of peace in Northern Ireland, and has acted as president of Liberal International and was one of the youngest ever appointed as life member of the House of Lords of the Westminster Parliament. Crucial to mention, finally, that he is also a clinical and academic physician and psychiatrist, and is currently the director of the very relevant Centre for the Resolution of Intractable Conflict. Over to you, Lord Allardyce.
Thank you very much indeed, Nala, and thank you very much to all our colleagues, those who have presented, those who have asked questions, and those who have organised things, to the University of Victoria and to the Senate of Canada. And I bring you greetings, institutional greetings, because I spent part of my time at the University of Oxford and the rest of my time, as you said, at the House of Lords, which is the upper chamber of our Parliament, and of course the upper chamber of your Parliament, working with your university. So it's a great delight to be together with you. And you've presented us with some enormous challenges, and I'm not going to be able to answer those challenges. I'm really going to try to point up some of them and where they may take us to, and hopefully in the rest of the conference, it will be possible to chew over those things and think about them. Now, we started off with the recognition from Dr. Skip Dick that you were meeting in the territory of a number of Indigenous people. And in a sense, I'm doing that too, here in Oxford, because I'm Irish. And I've only been in the land of the Anglo-Saxons for a couple of years here. And it's a very interesting thing getting used to it, because, you see, in the little village I live in, the church was built in 1120 on the site of a previous Anglo-Saxon church, a wooden church. And as I think about the situation we're in now, bridging divides in the wake of the pandemic, which is the title of the conference, I'm struck, of course, by the division between English people and Irish people, which I spent a good deal of my life trying to deal with. But I'm also struck by the history of pandemic. You see, in this part of the world, we didn't just have the 1918 to 1920 flu pandemic, but we also had in the 14th century the Black Death. And there are still some villages around here with no one living in them anymore for the last few hundred years, because all the people died in the Black Death. So pandemics aren't new, but one of the things we know about them is they change things profoundly. Not everything, some things get carried through, but you were talking just a few minutes ago about the fact that cities were developing and maybe indeed moving away from nations to cities and city-states. After the Black Death, many people moved from the land and from villages increasingly into cities. And of course, with industrialization, that developed further. After the flu pandemic and of course, the First World War, empires disappeared. And we had the possibility of the United Nations because we moved to nation states. Prior to that, we didn't have nation states. We had empires and colonies and so on. So there are going to be big changes. That's the first thing. The second thing is there are going to be big changes for all of us. Many people look at the situation and they say, well, of course, so-and-so needs to change. And we have the ideas and we have the plans. I'm afraid the reality is much more difficult than that. It is that all of us are going to have to change. Those who are Indigenous and those who are immigrant. And of course, in Canada, you have a lot of experience of the need to take into account people of a very different culture and perspective between the Anglophones and the Francophones, as well as between the Indigenous and the immigrant, both the immigrant from a few hundred years ago and the immigrants more recent times. One of my friends, it's been mentioned I'm a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst as well as a politician. One of my friends, Ed Shapiro, was asked recently, he's a psychoanalyst, he was asked recently, how can you sum up in a sentence what you have learned from a lifetime in psychoanalysis? He says it's very simple. what I've learned is that I have to ask myself the question every time, this guy or girl that I disagree with, what are they right about? Not what are they wrong about? That's dead easy, but it doesn't get you anywhere. The question is, what are they right about? And if we look at the election south of your border, we see that half of the people went one way and half of the people went the other way. And it's not going to be enough to say, well, there's half of them I agree with, so let's go with that. What about the other half that one doesn't agree with? And the great difficulty about the United Nations is that it hasn't been able to find agreement. And there's been a lot of talk about democracy, but in the last 10 years, more countries have moved away from democracy than have moved to democracy. And we have to ask ourselves, why is it that things are becoming more problematic and difficult in this territory? So we have a lot of important questions to ask. Now, a number of you have given good thoughts, for example, about the development of science. The problem is science doesn't give us one answer. When you say, what does science tell us about dealing with the pandemic? It says, isolate. But if you ask what to do about health of people who don't have the pandemic, well, it's a completely different issue. And so in all of our countries, those who have been looked after because they have the pandemic or have the risk of developing the infection, the result has been that many people with other health problems have lost out. So as Liz was saying earlier on, these are complex problems, systemic issues, questions of values as well as of science. And they lead us to situations where we do not agree upon what is the good. And that's why our future has to be found in the pluralism of accepting difference and finding ways not of conflict and violence, but of cooperation even with those with whom we disagree. And I hope that will be possible as you work together, as we all work together in this marvelous opportunity that has been given to us by the University of Victoria and by the Senate of Canada. Thank you very much.
It sounds like we're having a little bit of communication difficulty with Ambassador Berlier, who is going to wrap up the session. From my side, thank you very much. This has been an amazingly interesting and fascinating discussion that I hope sets the stage for what we will be talking about over the next couple of days at the Victoria Forum. From here, we will go into a series of roundtable panel discussions beginning in about 15 minutes from now. In the interim, please take an opportunity to experience the platform that we're using, the VFAIRs. There is an opportunity to engage in discussion with colleagues and to network in the lounge. There's an opportunity to visit some booths in the exhibition area, and there's an opportunity to learn more about what we're doing at the Victoria Forum. Please use these resources. Please connect over the course of the day and tomorrow. And we look forward to seeing you coming back with us tomorrow morning, as well as all of the sessions today. So once again, thank you very much to all of our panelists. Merci beaucoup. And we appreciate all of the engagement that we've had today. So that'll conclude this session. And we look forward to seeing you in the roundtable discussions in 10 or 15 minutes. So thank you all.